Greetings! It is I, Tantus Narvan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. Today is to continue our talking of the history of Magic the Gathering. I'm going to introduce a new set this time. I'm going to talk about Ice Age. So let's begin talking about Ice Age. Now, Ice Age was released in June of 1995. It was 383 cards, and it is the first set that was considered part of a block. Now, a block is a series of sets of cards, usually 3, sometimes 2, that all have a similar theme, that they share this theme, and basically share a storyline. Now, as I said, Ice Age was the first part of a block, which originally the block included alliances and homelands, but in 2006, when Cold Snap, another set, was released, it replaced homelands as part of this block. So this block actually wasn't completed until 2006, even though the first part of it was released in 1995. Now, this set was described as taking place after the Brothers' Wars and in the perpetual winter that occurred after it, post-Brothers' War. Now, there are some things they introduced. They introduced cumulative upkeep. Cumulative upkeep occurs when, at the beginning of someone's upkeep, they have to pay a cost, and every upkeep after that, they have to pay that cost compounded, which means if I have to pay a blue mana, let's say, every turn I have to play an extra blue mana. So it's first 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. That you have to keep paying the upkeep, and it becomes cumulative. They also introduced some of the allied color alliances, meaning that they had a good number of cards, which dealt with the fact that, like, if I'm a white creature, I might have something to do with green creatures and enhance them, or I might use some green mana to enhance myself. That they did focus a bit on those allied colors and working together. They introduced cantrips. Cantrips were small spells that if I cast it, I could also get another effect to it. It's basically that when I cast a cantrip, I can draw a card after it. I use it. Now, the cantrips have evolved in differently. In these original ones, I'd be drawing a card at the beginning of my next upkeep that I'm taking, but you could also have it that some cantrips actually have it that you draw it right away. It's going to depend on the cantrip, but they usually are cheap cost, and they allow you to draw a card sometime in the future to replace the one you're playing. That's what a cantrip is. Well, that's what things that are referred to as a cantrip are. Now, they also introduced snow lands and snow creatures. Now, snow cards didn't really evolve until Cold Snap. There have been some erratas to go back and call things snow that weren't originally, but a snow land was a special land that they had that then certain cards in the set would be affected by accordingly. They were basically the basic lands, and they were treated as basic lands, except they had snow on them, so they were the snow lands. So it was the first standalone expansion to include a full variety of the basic lands. So beyond those snow lands I mentioned, it had the full set of basic lands. Up until now, the only expansion that had an actual basic land was Arabian Nights, and that accidentally had a mountain. It wasn't supposed to, but it got one. In this set, they printed all the basic lands. Now, the story of this set tells of the last bastions and remaining parts of civilization and society that are remaining during this Ice Age, and that they have to come together and unite against this terrible necromancer, Lim-Dul, and his ambitions. Now, this was first set to have been sold under a specific print period, that they would print for a certain period of time, and then they would stop printing it, and they wouldn't produce it anymore. But previously, when they produced sets, they had a print run, that they would have certain runs of printing, and they would sell it with when supplies lasted. That means this set didn't exist as long in just around as some of the other ones did in a way. It was more a controlled release of it. Now, this was the first expansion to reprint cards. 8% of the cards in this set were direct reprints from previous sets. Another 8% were actually reprints, but with different names and sort of different flavor on them. So it was effectively the exact same card, just a different name. So it was a pseudo reprint. So 16% of the cards were effectively repeats. Now, this is also the first expansion to be sold in French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish. Now, the last big thing I want to mention about this set, it was the first set to have monocolored legends. Up until now, if a set had a legendary creature, it would be multicolored. This was the first set to print a legend that was just a single color. So now let's talk about some of the specific cards from the set. I'm not going to go over any cards that are actually repeats from other sets that I've talked about. I'm just going to keep to the ones that were new to this set. Let's talk about Necro Potent. So Necro Potent's made you skip your draw step. If you should discard a card to your graveyard, it's exiled instead. Now, the big thing it allowed you to do is you could pay 1 life and exile the top card of your library face down. If you use this ability at the next end step, you put it into your hand. So it would allow you to draw a lot of extra cards. It's just that you would be paying a lot of life to gain them. Next, I want to talk about Zurin Orb. Zurin Orb cost you 0 mana to cast. Its ability was you could sacrifice a land to gain 2 life. Next up is Jester's Cap. Jester's Cap, you could pay 2 mana, sacrifice it, and search an opponent's library for 3 cards. You removed those 3 cards, exiled them, and then that player shuffled their library. Next, I want to talk about their version of the sort of dual lands. They had 2 different types. The first was Pain Lands. With a Pain Land, you could either tap it for 1 colorless, or you could tap it for 1 of 2 colors. If you tapped it for 1 of those 2 colors, the land would deal 1 damage to you. So you could still get a colorless out of it, but you could also tap it and deal some damage to yourself. Other than that, there was the Depletion Lands. The Depletion Lands, when you tapped it for 1 of 2 colors, it would put a depletion counter on it. It would be removed during your next untap, but as long as it had a counter on it, it doesn't untap. So basically, if I tap it for 1 of these 2 colors, it gets this counter. During my next untap, instead of untapping, it removes that counter, and then in the turn after that, it untaps. So every other turn, you get 1 of 2 colors from a Depletion Land. Next, I want to talk about Brainstorm. It's one that's actually had a lot of use. When you cast Brainstorm, you draw 3 cards, and you take 2 cards from your newly expanded hand and put them back on top of your library in any order. So it's actually had a lot of use over the years. Now, Clairvoyance is an example of a cantrip. You look at target player's hand, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, you draw a card. Next up is General Jerkelt. He's actually one of the monocolor legends that I was talking about. Now, his ability is that you can tap him, and you can choose 2 target blockers and switch the attackers of them that they're blocking, as long as it's legal. So you target these 2 blocking creatures and switch their attackers, the ones that they actually are blocking. And again, as long as it's legal. Next up is Glacial Crevice. Glacial Crevice allows you to sacrifice a snow-covered mountain in order to prevent all combat damage for a turn. So it's a red version of a fog effect. Next, I wanted to introduce Illusionary Wall. It's got a cumulative upkeep of 1 blue, but it is a 7/4 defender flying first strike. So this is a ridiculously powerful wall that, flies at its first strike, but it has a cumulative upkeep of 1 blue. So you have to keep paying for it every turn you keep it out. Next up is Tinder Wall. Now, Tinder Wall, I'm using it as an example for the allied colors getting together. This one is a green creature, but you can sacrifice it for 2 red. Or if you really wanted to, you can pay 1 red and sacrifice it and deal 2 damage to a creature that it blocked. So it itself cannot do damage to something it's blocking, but it should be killed or something from something that it is blocking. You could still put a little damage back to it by sacrificing. And the last one I want to mention is Hecatomb. Now, Hecatomb, when it came into play, you had to sacrifice 4 creatures. But after that, whenever you had a swamp out, you could tap it. Instead of for 1 mana, you could also tap it to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. So for a big ritual, you can make your own swamps really powerful. So that's all I want to talk about today. I've introduced to you the set of Ice Age and gone over the history of it. I've talked to you a little bit about how it works and all the things about it. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think you missed, please leave it in the comments below. Please like this video. It's a great way of showing your support for the channel, for the Empire. Please subscribe if you already haven't. We're always looking for more members, more citizens of the Empire. And please share this video if you know anybody that would be interested in it or learn anything about it. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.